No. Basic economic ideas. On completion of this course section, you should know what is meant by scarcity and the inevitability of choices that have to be made by individuals, firms, and governments. What is meant by opportunity cost? Why the basic question of what, how, and for whom production takes place have to be addressed in all economies. What is meant by factors of production, namely land, labor, capital, and enterprise. What is meant by division of labor? The characteristics of a production possibilities curve. How resources are allocated in the market, planned, and mixed economies. Problems of transition when central planning in an economy is reduced. The difference between positive and normative statements in economics. The functions and characteristics of money. One economic problem, or many. Economists have to deal with a whole range of economic problems. You may have seen on TV programs about the misery of unemployment and poverty. You may have read about the difficulties caused by inflation and heard politicians discuss exchange rate crisis on the evening news. You may also be aware of debates surrounding issues such as the acute shortage of skilled labor, the benefits of greater liberalization of international trade, the problems of global warming, and the population explosion in many developing economies. Despite this extensive range of issues, which economists are trained to consider, they often talk about the economic problem. This is the fundamental problem from which all others arise. This is the fact that we have scarce resources to satisfy our unlimited wants. As a result of this problem, which is sometimes called the problem of scarcity, we have to make a choice. And it is the task of the economist to explain and analyze the nature of choice facing economic agents, such as consumers, producers, and governments. The economic problem is scarce resources in relation to unlimited wants. The problem is summarized on Figure 1.1, page 16. Because the economic problem exists, societies need to confront the following three interrelated questions. What to produce? Because we cannot produce everything, we need to decide what to produce and in what quantities. We have to choose, for example, whether to produce lots of goods and services, such as food, clothing, and vehicles, to improve our standard of living, or whether we need to produce lots of military hardware to improve our defenses. How to produce? This question arises from the basic economic problem that since resources are scarce in relation to unlimited wants, we need to consider how resources are used so that the best outcome arises. We need to consider how we can get the maximum use out of resources available to us. It should be noted, however, that these issues, besides purely economic concerns, should be considered when deciding how to produce. It may be true, for example, that slavery or forced labor, for example, we could produce more goods and services in an economy, but there is a moral objection to such arrangement. Similarly, crop yields could be well increased through introduction of genetically modified plants, but this may lead to damage to the ecosystem. The decision to maximize output and satisfy more wants would need to consider the full impact on the environment on any potential long-term health effects. For whom to produce? Because we cannot satisfy all the wants of all the population, decisions have to be taken concerning how many of each person wants to be satisfied. On a broad level, we need to decide whether everyone is going to be more or less equal share of what is produced, or whether some will have more than others. In some economies, there are deliberate attempts to create a more egalitarian society through policies that redistribute wealth and income from the rich to the poor. This could be achieved through progressive taxation systems. In other economies, there are no such policies, and inequalities of wealth and income, usually based upon inheritance, remain extreme. In answering these questions, moral aspects of decision-making are again important. Limited resources. In economics, we categorize the resources available to us in four types. These are known as factors of production. Number 1, land. This factor is the natural resource. It includes the surface of the earth, lakes, rivers, and forests. It also includes mineral deposits below the earth and the climate above. Labor. This factor is the human resource, the basic determinant of which the nation's population. Not all the populations are available to work, because some are above or below the working population age, and some choose not to work. Capital. This factor is any man-made aid to production. In this category, we should include a simple spade and a complex car assembly plant. Capital goods help land and labor produce more units of output. They improve the output from land and labor. These three factors are organized into units of production by firm. 4. Enterprise, or entrepreneurship. This factor carries out two functions. First, the enterprise factor organizes the other three factors of production. Secondly, enterprise involves taking the risks of production, which exists in free market economy. Some firms are small with few resources. The functions of enterprise are undertaken by a single individual, the entrepreneur. In large, more complex firms, the functions are divided, with salaried managers organizing the other factors and shareholders taking the risk. Some economies have a large quantity of high quality factors of production at their disposal. They can create lots of goods and services to satisfy the wants of their population. They are said to have a good factor endowment. Some economies lack sufficient quantities of one or more factors. Developing countries, for example, might have large quantities of land and labor, but lack sufficient capital and enterprise. The former planned economies of Eastern Europe, such as Poland, have found it difficult to develop because there are few people with entrepreneurial experience. Production and consumption. Resources are combined in the process of production to create goods and services. Goods and services have the capacity to satisfy wants. The process through which individuals use up goods and services to satisfy wants is known as consumption. Some goods, such as chocolate bar, are quickly used up to satisfy our wants. Other things satisfy wants over longer periods. These are called consumer durables. Examples of consumer durables include television sets, refrigerators, and vehicles. Unlimited wants. We can all identify certain basic wants which must be satisfied if we are to stay alive. These include the obvious essentials of food, shelter, and clothing. We might also identify those wants which are clearly less essential but which we think improve our quality of life. Some might include television sets, cars, trips to the cinema, and so on. These are sometimes called luxuries. What is important to remember that what might be a luxury for one individual might be considered essential for others. This is because we all have a scale of preference, with our more urgent ones at the top and the less urgent ones at the bottom. Each individual scale of preference is a product of a complex set of influences involving culture, upbringing, and life experiences. These together influence our likes and dislikes. Unsurprisingly, since we all have different experiences, there is bound to be a great variation between any two individual scales of preferences. You may find it interesting to conduct a class exercise in which everyone makes a list of 10 wants in descending order of priority. When you compare results, you may be surprised to find that although there may be broad agreement in the first few choices, there is likely to be considerable variation as you compare people's choices over the full list. You may also consider how your list will compare to lists combined by others very different life experiences, such as your teacher, your grandparents, or even a student of economics in another country. A further point to consider is whether you could imagine any end to your list if you were not limited to 10 choices. It is important to remember that our wants are continually expanding, developing, and changing. Some wants expand as we grow up, marry, and raise a family. Imagine how your housing needs change as we go through this process, or how we change from wanting a small car with 2 doors to wanting a large family saloon with 4 doors. Some of our wants develop and expand when we see others around us enjoying goods and services and we feel the need to keep up. Sometimes our wants change as we have new experiences. For example, we might decide to go on a diet because we have seen a TV program about obesity. All of this points to the fact that we can never imagine a time when all of our wants are satisfied. Our wants are continually expanding and changing. Despite the fact that we're continually finding new and more efficient ways to produce more and more goods and services with the resources available to us, we are still faced with the basic economic problem that we have limited resources and unlimited wants. This is sometimes called the problem of scarcity. As a result, we have to make choices. The economic problem described above only occurs when we are dealing with what are known as economic goods. These are goods which have a cost in terms of real resources used. They are therefore scarce in nature. The opposite are free goods, which have no price attached to them and which require no factors of production for their enjoyment by consumers. Consequently, there are few examples, other than, say, wild berries, fruit, and some animals, that can be hunted for their meat by anyone who seeks to do so. Specialization and exchange. One of the ways in which more goods and services can be produced in the economy is through a process of specialization. This refers to a situation where individuals and firms, regions, and nations concentrate upon producing some goods and services rather than others. This can be clearly illustrated at the individual level. Within the family, may be specialization in the form of household tasks, which with one person doing ironing and gardening while another does the shopping and cooking. At the workplace, of course, the fact that some people are laborers are lorry drivers, while others office jobs is also a reflection of specialization. At this level, specialization allows individuals to concentrate upon what they are best at, and thus more goods and services will be produced. With specialization, however, although more is produced, no one is self-sufficient. It becomes necessary to exchange goods and services. As an individual specializes, they will produce a surplus beyond their needs, which they can exchange for the surpluses of others. With the expansion of trade and the development of markets, the benefits of regional and national specialization become apparent. Surplus produced by regions and countries were bought and sold, allowing world living standards to rise. Just as individuals concentrate on what they were best at, so did regions and countries. Specialization has clearly resulted in a massive expansion in world living standards, but there are dangers too. Given the pace of the technological change in modern society, there is always the possibility that specialist skills and accumulated experience which any individual has acquired may become redundant as the economy develops. Individuals need to be flexible and multi-skilled and be able to move between occupations. At regional and national levels, changes in consumers' wants can sometimes mean that goods and services produced in a region or country are no longer required in the same quantity and unemployment can result. Policies then have to be adopted to deal with the economic and social problems that will arise. This issue will be looked at in depth in Chapter 7 supplement. The division of labor. With the technical advances of these last few hundred years, the production of goods and services happened on a much larger scale. The concentration of large numbers of workers with very large production units allowed the process of production to be broken down into a series of tasks. This is called the divisions of labor. For example, Adam Smith, writing at the end of the 18th century, showed how production in pens would benefit from the application of the division of labor in a factory. He suggested that pen making could be divided into 18 distinct operations, and that if each employee undertook only one of these operations, production would rise to 5,000 pens per employee per day. This was compared to the estimate that each employee would be able to produce only a few dozen each day if they produced pens individually. Although the division of labor raises output, it often created dissatisfaction in the workforce, who became bored with the monotonous nature of their tasks. In the United States, the process was taken a stage further in the 1920s, when Henry Ford introduced conveyor belt production into the car industry. Ford's method of car production provided the model for which of manufacturing production in the 20th century. In more recent times, the dehumanizing impact of production techniques, such as those using conveyor belt, have been recognized and an alternate method of production have been introduced. Choice and opportunity cost. Given limited resources and unlimited wants, we have to choose which wants to satisfy. The true cost of any choice we make between alternatives is expressed by economists through the notion of opportunity cost. This looks at the cost of our choices in terms of the next best alternative foregone. For example, suppose you were given a $15 gift voucher for your birthday. You could either buy a new compact disc, which costs $15, or two paper books for $7.50 each. It is clear that you could not have the CD and the books. The opportunity cost of the CD, therefore, is two paperback books. The value of the concept of opportunity cost is that it brings home to us the real cost of our choices. It can be applied in a variety of contexts in economics and is helpful for economic decision makers, such as households, firms, and governments. Production possibilities curves. How many goods and services an economy is capable of producing is determined by the quantity and quality of resources available to it, together with the state of technological change. These factors determine an economy's production possibilities. Example: an imaginary economy, given its available resources, can produce either military goods or consumer goods, or a combination of each. The various production possibilities are shown in Table 1.1. It is sometimes useful to illustrate the choices open to an economy by considering the production possibilities curve. For the schedule of 1.1, Table 1.1, we can produce a production possibilities curve with military goods plotted on the vertical axis and consumer goods on the horizontal axis. Figure 1.3 shows all possible combination of military goods and consumer goods which could be produced given the existing quantity and quality of resources in our imaginary economy and the existing state of technological knowledge. At point A, only military goods are produced, and at point D, only consumer goods are produced. But between these two extremes lie all other possibilities. The term production possibilities curve emphasizes that this shows what levels of output an economy can achieve with its existing resources. It also can be used to show what the economy is not able to achieve. Point Y on the graph represents a combination of military and consumer goods, which is not possible to achieve. It is beyond our production possibilities. Okay, this is figure 1.3 of production possibilities curves. Here at point D, we have all consumer goods and no military goods. You can think of this as an XY of your mathematics class. X, the quantity is 20, and this is in thousands. And the Y, it is 0. Okay, 20, 0, XY coordinates. But here we just use consumer goods and military goods. Here at point A, we have all military goods and no consumer goods. So that point is 10, 0. Or on the XY coordinate, it would be 0 and 10. Point B is on the also an efficient point along the line where we use all possible combination of military goods and consumer goods, and C is there. X is inefficient because at this point here, I could have, at this point, let's say that this is 5 military goods, 5 right here. Okay, at this level 5, I could have had this level C right here. Let's call it 10. This is 10. Okay, so at this point at C, I get 10 consumer goods and 5 military goods. Okay, but at 5, if I choose X, I don't get all of my consumer goods. That's why point X is inefficient. Okay, Y is not possible because it's not along this line or inside this line. It's a combination of consumer goods and military goods that is not possible. Okay, so back to the reading. Sometimes the curve is called a production frontier because it draws the boundary between what can and cannot be achieved. Figure 1.3 is also useful in illustrating the real cost to society of unemployed resources. The point X on the diagram represents a production of 4,000 military goods and 3,000 consumer goods. This is possible to achieve because it is within the production frontier, but it represents a point where some resources are unemployed or not employed effectively. The economy is capable of moving to point B with more military goods and the same number of consumer goods, or to point C, which would bring more consumer goods and the same quantity of military goods. Alternatively, at point B and C, the economy can have more of both types of goods. Looking at the diagram in this way illustrates the waste from unemployed resources. We are not satisfying as many of our wants as possible. A further alternative name for production possibilities curve is the production transformation curve. This emphasizes a further use for the concept of in an introductory economics. In figure 1.3, as the economy moves along the curve from point A through point D, then a different combination of goods is being chosen. More consumer goods are being produced and fewer military goods. This emphasizes that the cost of producing more consumer goods and less military goods, which have to be sacrificed. Given the figures, we can calculate the opportunity cost of consumer goods in terms of military goods. A move from B to C on the graph leads to a gain of 8,000 consumer goods, but we sacrifice 4,000 military goods. The opportunity cost of one consumer good is therefore half of a military good. This is equivalent to one military good having an opportunity cost of 2 consumer goods. As we move along the curve, the composition of our output is being transformed. We should also note that we need to switch our resources from one use to another. Resources have to be switched from producing military goods to producing consumer goods and vice versa. This is known as reallocation of resources. And in the real world, as we decide to change the composition of our output, we need to consider the costs of reallocating resources between uses. These include the costs of retraining the workforces in the skills required to produce different types of goods and services. This might take a long time and might only be possible as new entrants to the labor force are trained in new skills. The extent to which resources can be reallocated from one line of production to another is known as factor mobility. And if we want resources to be swiftly allocated to the new use, we have to ensure that the factors are as mobile as possible. It should be noted in our example that the opportunity cost of military goods in terms of consumer goods has not changed because we have chosen different combination of the two goods. This is in fact quite unrealistic. A more likely outcome is that the production possibilities curve will illustrate increasing costs. Consider the production possibilities curve on table 1.2, which shows the quantity of agricultural goods and manufactured goods that can be produced in an economy given existing resources and state of technology. Agricultural products, manufactured products, table 1.2. Assume that the initial economy is producing at point P with 660 agricultural goods and 100 manufactured products. Then assume that it is decided to move to point Q to gain an extra 100 units of manufactured products. Clearly, resources needed to be reallocated from agricultural use to manufacturing. At first, the least fertile land will be reallocated and only 60 units of agriculture produced will be sacrificed. This means that the extra consumer goods has a 0.6 of an agricultural good, has a cost of 0.6 of an agricultural good. Now compare this with the movement from R to S sub R to gain an extra 100 manufactured goods. We have to sacrifice 200 agricultural goods. This means that one extra manufactured good has two agricultural goods. The cost has increased as we have reallocated our resources. This is because at this stage, we are switching the more fertile land to the manufactured good production so that the agricultural product is going to be affected to a much greater extent. This diagram illustrates a production possibilities curve with increasing costs. Shifts in the production possibilities curve. And this is a production possibilities curve here. Manufactured product, agricultural product. Okay, shifts in production possibilities curve. A production possibilities curve is drawn on the assumption that the quantity and quality of resources and the state of technology are fixed. Through time, of course, economies can gain or lose resources. The quality of resources and the state of technology knowledge can change. Such changes will shift the production possibility curves to a new position. Figure 1.5 illustrates the outcomes of changes in the quantity and quality of resources and changes in technology. This is figure 1.5. As we get more resources, we can shift out and produce more at each level. Agricultural products and manufactured product is shifting out. Here, we only have resources in agriculture that is increasing. So the manufactured products here do not expand out, but only the agriculture expand out. That's what's going on. Okay, so moving on. Figure 1.58 shows a situation in which the production possibilities available to an economy have expanded. This is known as economic growth. This could be due to an increase in the quantity and the quality of resources available to the economy or an improvement in the state of technology. Here the changes have improved the economy's ability to produce both agriculture and manufactured products. In figure 1.5b, however, only the ability to produce agricultural products has been improved. This could perhaps be because there has been a technological breakthrough in producing agricultural products, in which does not apply to the production of manufactured products. Nevertheless, this economy's production possibilities have improved and the curve has shifted toward their origin. The production possibilities could also have declined. This could be because in some way resources available to the economy have declined. Perhaps some of the economy's natural resources have exhausted, or the workers' population is falling. It also be because the availability of technology has changed. An example might be the impact of controls on global emissions, which will affect the production possibilities as controls become more rigorous. Making use of production possibilities curves. We can use production possibilities curve to illustrate some of the issues facing economic decisions in the real world. Jam today or more jam tomorrow? As stated previously, the production possibilities open to an economy are determined by the quantity and quality of resources available. In the process of production, resources are used up and they need to be replaced if production possibilities are to be maintained. The terms capital consumption or depreciation describe the using up of capital goods during the process of production. Some resources need to be devoted to the production of capital goods if production possibilities are to be maintained. The creation of capital goods in the process of production is known as investment. This can be defined as any production not for current consumption. A choice that is to be made, therefore, between production producing consumer goods and services or producing capital goods through the process of investment. The more consumer goods and services produced, the higher the current standard of living. But the standard of living might fall in the future if it is a failure to produce sufficient capital goods to replace those worn out in the process of production. In addition, the quality of an economy's capital goods will not be improved and the full benefits of new technology will not be enjoyed if there is a failure to devote sufficient resources to investment. Figure 1.6 shows the production possibilities between capital and consumer goods. Figure 1.6. Consumer capital goods. These possibilities are determined by the quantity and quality of resources in the economy, which include capital goods and that have been produced in the past. If we assume the quantity of capital goods which are wearing out in each time period is shown at A, then we can see that the consequences of our choices, if we fail to produce the quantity A, then our capital stock will decline. Production possibilities will diminish and the curve will shift to the left. Hard choices for developing economies. Developing economies are characterized by low standards of living. If they are to grow, then they need to increase their capital stock. Like all economies, they need to divert resources from current consumption to investment. Some resources must be devoted to consumption, however, to keep their expanding populations alive. We refer to this as the subsistent level of consumption. The difficulty is that in the poorest developing economies, all of their production possibilities need to be devoted to subsistence. In figures 1.7, OA represents the capital consumption of the developing company, and OB represents the consumer goods developed for the subsistence of a population. Secondary sector. This term is used to describe the wide range of manufacturing activities that are found in an economy. Typical examples are food processing, textiles, clothing, iron and steel production, vehicle manufacturing, and electronics. Tertiary sector. These are the service sector and covers a range of diverse activities such as retailing, transport, financial services, education, call center services, and information technologies. As economies develop, their economic structure changes. There is a progression from primary to secondary to tertiary activities in developed economies. The tertiary sector tends to be principal employer. In the UK, for example, in 2008, around 4 out of every 5 people in employment were employed in the tertiary sector. This is not the case in the less developed economies. In Tanzania and Kenya, by way of contract, similar proportions of workers are employed in the primary sector alone. These are economic structures. The term economic structures refers to the way in which the economy consists of various sectors. It is useful to show the balance of economic activity, usual measures in terms of value of total output between these sectors. The remaining sector, not mentioned before, is called the primary sector. This consists of agriculture, fishing, activities such as mining and oil. In developing countries, such as Tanzania, large proportions of workers are employed in the primary sector alone. Different allocative mechanisms. The problem of scarcity, which in turn requires choices to be made, is one that is common to all economies, rich and poor. The choices that are made and which are relativistically can be made in turn are determined by the economic system of a particular country. This term is used to describe the means or allocative mechanism by which its people, business, and government make choices. Traditionally, economists have recognized 3 distinct types of economic system. These are the market economy, the command or planned economy, and the mixed economy. Let us briefly consider each in turn. The market economy decisions are on how resources are to be allocated are usually taken by millions of households and thousands of firms. The exact number will be, of course, dependent on the size of the economy. The key point is that they interact as buyers and sellers in a market for goods and services. Prices and the operation of the price system underpin this interaction. In turn, prices act to indicate the likely market value of particular resources. For example, a commodity in short supply but which has a high demand attached to it will have higher prices. Alternatively, one which has a high supply and low demand will have much lower price attached to it. Prices in the self-interest of people and businesses therefore act to guide to the decisions that have to be taken. Economics as a subject has its origin in the notion that prices and the market mechanism are the best way of handling economic problems. This notion can be particularly attributed to the Scottish economist Adam Smith, who is remembered for his reference to an invisible hand, the price system, that brings together private and social interests in a harmonious way. This is the fundamental philosophy underpinning the working of the market economy. The government has a very restrictive part to play in the market economy. For example, in the Smith's view, it should control national defense, act against monopolies, issue money, raise taxes, and so on, whilst protecting the rights of the private sector. They certainly should not try to influence the dealing of individuals in the markets or to regulate the workings of the market. Figure 1.8 is a simple representation of these functions. Before moving on, it must be clear that the market economy is an ideal which does not exist in today's complex global economy. Arguably, its most important representation is the United States of America, and it should be stressed that the federal and state governments play important roles in the economy and society, as well as providing defense, law, and order in other public services. The command economy. Like the market economy, the command or centrally planned economy is the purest form exists only in theory. In the second type of economy, the government has a central role in all decisions that are made, and unlike the market economy, the emphasis is on centralization. Central planning, boards, and organizations make decisions in enterprises that are state-owned and under state regulation and control. Whereas in a market economy, consumer sovereignty influences resource allocation. In a command economy, it is the central planners who determine the collective preferences of consumers and manufacturing enterprises. The planned economy of the last 50 years or so have their economic logic in the Marxian criticism of the market economy. The particular objective was the central one of the class conflict between the wealthy owners of capital and the poor working class who provided the wealth through the production process. Marx was also critical of built-in unemployment rises out of the market system. For example, he observed the trend to replace labor with machines capital and the inability of labor to secure higher wages. Under a command economy, unemployment is not an issue. Marx was also very concerned about the way in which the market economy fostered the concentration of production resources in the hands of large monopolists, industrial and commercial organizations. As such, he determined that they corrupted the workings of demand and supply, and if powerful enough, could exact pressure on the governments. Retrospectively, and in light of the empirical evidence experience, economists have, with some justification, concluded that Marx's criticisms were excessive. Nevertheless, his general recognition that centralization should occur and that more emphasis should be placed on economic planning has been applied by those countries which have pursued the notion of a planned economy. So the key features of a command economy are the central government and its constituent organizations take responsibility for the allocation of resources, the determination of production targets for all sectors of the economy, the distribution of income and the determination of wages, the ownership of most production resources and property, planning the long-term growth of the economy. From the practical standpoint, some of these decisions have to be decentralized either geographically or by sector to the government organizations. In certain cases, these bodies have control over the workings of a limited market mechanism. A good example of this is where basic foodstuffs such as bread and meat are heavily subsidized to keep prices at a fixed level and to exempt consumers from the price fluctuations which are commonplace in the market economy. Artificially low prices result in excess demand relative to supply. Queuing becomes a way of life. Also, from a practical standpoint, it is very difficult for all enterprise to be state-owned. There has to be a limited opportunity for the private ownership of small businesses such as shops, restaurants, and personal services like hairdressing and cleaning. For more substantive businesses, ownership is often a shared basis between the state and private sector. This often involves foreign investments who are keen to exploit the opportunities of emerging market economy. The outcome of the command economy is that central planning tends to set goals for the economy that differ from those of the market economy. In particular, they have a clear objective of achieving as high a rate of economic growth as possible in order to catch up on the progress being made by much more advanced market economies. The command economy is more correctly described as one sacrificing current consumption and standards of living in order to achieve enhanced future well-being. This is the sacrifice that has to be made by represented to present generations for the benefit of future generations. The last point can be illustrated by returning to the production possibilities curve. Figure 1.9 indicates the economy choice between capital goods and consumer goods. The former represent investment in machinery, equipment, infrastructure, and technology, and so on, which will in time increase the productive capacity in the economy. Consumer goods like cars, refrigerators, televisions are for current consumption. In making this choice, command economies have chosen to produce at point X on a production possibilities curve rather than at point Y when consumer needs are satisfied in full. This is, of course, a highly simplified representation of what in reality is a very complex process of centralized decision making. The extent to which economies choose X rather than Y also varies, depending on the degree to which the economy sees growth as its first and only economic objective. The mixed economy. It is clear from a brief analysis of markets and command economies that, in the pure sense, these types of economic systems occur in theory and not in reality. In contrast, the mixed economy is undoubtedly the characteristic form of economic organization within the global economy. As its name indicates, it involves both private and public sectors in the process of resource allocation. Consequently, decisions on the most important economic issues involve some form of planning by private as well as public enterprises and the interaction between government, businesses, and labor through the market mechanism. Private ownership of productive resources operate along public ownership in many mixed economies, although increasingly the trend is toward the privatization of certain activities that were once in public sector hands. The best example of this undoubtedly is the UK economy in the mid 1970s when the public and private sectors were of broadly equal importance. At this time, the government was responsible for substantial areas of public expenditure such as healthcare, social services, education, and defense. The direct operation of nationalized industries such as coal, iron, steel, railways, gas, water, and telephones, and electricity, providing opportunity for large areas of manufacturing such as vehicles production, aerospace, and electronics in partnership with the private sector. Over the past 30 years, the strength of the public sector in the UK has substantially reduced, not only through privatization, but also through policy of non-intervention when private companies experience financial difficulties in their markets. Controversially, in the last few years, governments have made little or no attempt to stem the demise of car manufacturers in the UK, as one by one former British-owned companies have been rationalized by their non-UK owners. The modern views of recent UK governments, both Conservative and Labour, is that the responsibilities for the overall management of the macro economy and for the funding of the particular public and merit goods, which overall would be under-consumed if left to the private sector alone to provide. Merit goods are goods such as healthcare and education, which have positive externalities associated with them, and where there is likely to be underconsumption without government intervention. It is also the case that the new forms of regulation and control have had to be introduced in order to protect consumers from possible exploitation by the private sector provides of essential services. A very popular outcome of this UK experience is the millions more people now hold shares in such businesses. Elsewhere, there have been similar trends. One of the most dramatic has been the restructuring of the economy in the former Soviet Union, perestroika, as it's sometimes called. Under President Gorbachev's reform, small private businesses could be set up in the services sector, for example, cafes, retail shops, garages, taxi hire, and workers could form their own cooperatives to market and sell surplus production from monolithic state manufacturing companies. The U.S. economy is also an example of a mixed economy, somewhat contrary to common perception. For example, the government at all levels is an important employer and provides basic services such as education and various types of medical care. Government agencies regulate and control the provision of some essential services such as energy, telecommunications, and transportation. Indirect support is given to various strategically important companies. There are over and above the expected provisions of external defense and internal security services. It is not easy to explain the importance of a government's role in any particular mixed economy. In most cases, only real explanation is that it is usually a case of differing political philosophies. Figure 1.1 provides largely normative assessment of what particular economies fall in terms of relative strengths of the market and planned systems of resource allocation. In all cases, except arguably for North Korea, countries are moving towards giving market mechanisms an ever increasing role in their economic structures. In more recent times, the experience of newly industrialized countries and ICs is interesting. In terms of allocative mechanism, some, such as Singapore and Hong Kong, opted for a strong focus on the market to allocate resources and through this have created an economic situation where enterprise can be encouraged and rewarded. Other Southeast Asian tigers have placed more emphasis on central planning, while China's phenomenal growth over the last decade has been based on controlled management of their economy within a global context. The new tiger economies in Central Europe, particularly the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland, have reoriented their economies to foreign investors. In this way, they hope to achieve forecasting growth of around 5 to 7% per annum. These are very much in line with those experienced in Asia counterparts, yet significantly higher than those experienced in the past, more developed countries. Problems of the transition when central planning in an economy is reduced. Basic principles. As explained above, most developing countries, most most developing economies have strong foundation based on the models of centrally planned economy. Over the past 20 years, they have recognized the benefits for the economy when this activity is controlled by the government and when competitive markets in the private sector have an increasing role to play. Internationally, this approach is consistent with that of the World Bank, which as a part of its policy to promote development encourages such economic reforms. Figure 1.11, page 32, shows two diagrams which represent the general position of a central planned economy before reform and the situation once changes have been introduced. The labels at the bottom of each diagram generally summarize the state of affairs. The direction and relative size of the arrows are important. These show the relationship between the different sectors and the strength of their importance in promoting economic development and allocating of funding. In the world funding, the World Bank seeks to ensure the recipient countries are implementing the process of economic reform shown in this figure. Positive and normative economics. It is useful now to make distinction between positive and normative economics. Economics is a social science. As such, it has developed through using positive analysis that is devoid of any value judgment. Typical positive statements include the following. A fall in supply of petrol will lead to an increase in its price. An increase in tourism numbers in the Maldives will create more employment. An increase in the taxation on cigarettes will result in fewer cigarettes sold. These are statements of what will happen. No value judgments are involved. When values come into the analysis, then there is a normative economics. Here, an opinion or value judgment is being made. The above statements can become normative, for example, by adding, and this should be positive for the environment, and therefore the government of the Republic of Maldives should do everything it can help, and this should improve the nation's health. Money, its functions and characteristics. In some respects, money is something that virtually all of us take for granted. We need it in order to carry out our daily lives, to pay for things such as riding on a bus, purchasing a bottle of water or soft drink, buying lunch, and so on. Handling over a few coins or notes is essential if we are able to make able to buy what we want to satisfy our daily needs. Larger sums, of course, are required for things such as clothes, shoes, cars, and even school fees. The money which we use for purchase is usually in national currency such as dollars, pounds, or rupees. For 16 EU member states, the supranational euro has been in general use since 2002. The coins and notes have little or no intrinsic value. Their value stems directly from the fact that the sellers have complete confidence in the money given to them that prompts them to exchange it for the products we want to buy. So, what is money? A simple definition is that it is anything that is regularly used to buy goods and services. Normally, this is coins and notes, but the definition also includes checks, debit cards, and credit cards. To be acceptable from day to day practical standpoint, money must be portable and durable. However, money can also be in the form of a valued commodity such as gold or platinum. In Russia, for example, oil has been widely exchanged for imports such as buses and tracks from Hungary or agriculture bonds from Poland. Where there's hyperinflation, as in Zimbabwe, in recent years, people lose confidence in money. Many farm workers, for instance, have preferred to be paid in products and produce, as this will help its value and can be easily swapped for other things such as cooking oil, sugar, or bread. The direct exchange of one good or service for another in this way is known as barter, where this is the only way of exchange. Then the process of trade and exchange becomes lengthy and difficult. It is also very impractical since most be a coincidence. There must be a coincidence of wants, whereby both parties in an interaction actually have the good or services that the other wants. Money is therefore essential if the process of exchange and trades are to take place. Zimbabwe's descent in economic catastrophe has been a long drawn out affair. Following a drop in agricultural production after controversial land seizures, exports fell as foreign investors went elsewhere. The government sought to solve its liquidity problems by borrowing from foreign banks, knowing that it could not meet its loan repayments. The government made the situation worse by printing more money, much of which was used to pay the army, police, and civil servants. Eventually, inflation reached more than 1,000,000%, and the local people lost all confidence in the Zimbabwe dollar. Bearing the above in mind, economists recognize the following four essential functions of money. A. A medium exchange. Money is a medium or form that buyers can use for purchases sellers are willing to accept this medium in exchange for these purchases. By handing over money physically or by transferring money electronically through the bank system, this is common automatic acceptance of money fulfilling this function. A unit of account. Prices are quoted in terms of common monetary units. For example, in US dollars and cents are used, while in Pakistan, rupees and paise are used. This function is of relevance for current and future transactions. It is quite clear just how much money is required for a particular transaction. It also allows different values to be added, measured, and compared. Where money is borrowed, then the lender usually requires interest to be paid for this privilege. The account aspects allows the user of money to be recorded for different values to be added or compared. A standard for deferred payment. Not all payments we make are immediate. Some household bills are paid monthly, others may be paid annually. Following on for money as a unit of account, payments can be made in the future once terms have been agreed between the parties involved. A store of wealth. Money can be held or stored for a period of time. The bank. A standard for deferred payment. Not all payments we make are immediate. Some household bills are paid monthly, others may be paid annually. Following on from money is a unit of account. Payments can be made in the future once terms have been agreed between the parties involved. A store of wealth. Money can be held or stored for a period of time, usually with the bank or financial institutions before it is used. This is important function means that money is a measure of value over time. Where this value is accumulated, then it represents a source of wealth to its owner. In 2008, the two richest people in the world were both from the United States, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. Their personal wealth was in a wide range of assets, not just in bank accounts. Money has the common basis on which their wealth was estimated. The functions of money are vital for smooth operation of all economies. If any of the functions break down, as in the case of Zimbabwe, where money lost all meaning as a store of value or wealth, economic collapse is an inevitable outcome. It is therefore essential that a prudent government puts economic policies in place to ensure that this does not happen. Summary. In this section, it has been shown that all economies face the so-called economic problem of limited resources and unlimited wants. Choice is necessary in order to decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Factors of production, land, labor, capital, and enterprise, are essential for the production process. Specialization allows more goods and services to be produced. Money facilitates specialization and exchange. The true cost of choices we have to make is known as opportunity cost. A production possibilities curve is a representation of what can be produced in an economy and the trade-offs involved in making choices. There are various types of economic systems for the allocation of resources. The mixed economy is typical. There are problems of transition when former centrally planned economies move to mixed economies. Money has four functions that are essential to the smooth operation of